Hi, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas, and a long-term member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Been in recovery from alcohol addiction since December the 27th of 1972. And most of you know I got interested at about 20 years sober in the history of AA. I was getting a little dry around the edges. It was like I needed to go deeper into the program, and at that point, met a man in Oklahoma City who was a student of the Oxford group. He was an archivist for Alcoholics Anonymous in the state of Oklahoma, and he really introduced me in depth to the program and practices that AA adopted when they transitioned from being members of the Oxford group, because that's what Bill was and Bob was, and most of the early members were actually members of the Oxford group, and then they broke away and formed Alcoholics Anonymous, taking with them many of the principles and practices and leaving some behind. One of the ones that did kind of get left behind was the two-way prayer practice that was very, very important. In my research, I discovered that, began practicing it, and it became a genuine life changer for me. So for the last 28 years, I've been particularly interested in trying to get the word out to people in 12-step recovery about the importance of this practice. Many of us struggle with prayer and meditation, and they had a fairly simple process for doing it. And it was a life changer for me, and I've found it has been that for many, many people as well. Do workshops on this subject. The next workshop is going to be on August the 28th. That's on a Saturday from 10 o'clock in the morning to about 1 p.m. in the afternoon. That's Central Time. And you can get a flyer for that on our website, TwoWayPrayer, and encourage you to download that, send it to some friends, and get together and explore this practice, and then see if you can't begin practicing it together in some ways. So this one's a little bit different. This coming workshop, it's sponsored by an outside group. There's no charge for it, but they do ask for people to register. So unlike the ones we've been doing in the past, for this one, you will need to register, and you can do that online, and it's a very, very quick process. Want to give a shout out to the folks who've been supporting this podcast and website and all of the work that we're doing to get two-way prayer out there. I've been receiving a good number of donations lately via the website, and now we've added that you can make a donation through many of the podcasts that you're listening to. So that really helps us with the financing. I take absolutely no money from any of this work, but like we say in the fellowships, we do have expenses. So those donations really do help. We are finishing up this series on quiet time. We've kind of gone back to the original and really digging into what were the practices, how did they approach it. We were using the morning practice of quiet time and use Dick B's book, Good Morning, as kind of a jumping off point. And I said in the last episode that I was going to, in this final episode, do kind of the highlights of this whole series. But then I kind of changed my mind a little bit on that. I'm going to do some of it, but there was a thought that kept going through my mind as I was thinking about what to say on this particular episode. And it was an old priest who said something to me many, many years ago that I have never forgotten, some of the best advice I ever received. And he said, Bill, when you're preparing to do a talk or a sermon or a lecture, whatever it might be, ask yourself a question. And the question is, Do you have something to say, or do you just have to say something? And I've used that over the years because I find myself sometimes having to say something. And when I approach it in that way, it always kind of rings a little bit empty. But if I approach it from the other perspective, that I do have something to say, then I'm able to, I think, reach down deeper and hopefully connect with people who are hearing me at the other end. Why? Because I'm being more honest in where I'm coming from. So I want to hit some of the highlights of the morning quiet time practice as they approached it, but I want to do it a little bit differently in the sense of I want to feel a lot freer to talk about what it's meant for me and how I see it changing myself and potentially changing other people as well. So, uh, like I say, I did some research on this many, many years ago. Started reading Oxford Group books and a lot of AA literature that touches on it as well. And one of the first pieces that really grabbed my attention and surprised me, shocked me even, was the statement from Frank Amos, who was sent by J.D. Rockefeller in 1938 to examine this new program that was popping up in Akron and New York and Cleveland and having really good results in dealing with alcoholism, where most treatments had not been effective in the past. So Rockefeller had been approached by Bill Wilson. He wanted to get some funding for the new fellowship, and Amos went out to study it. Why was this thing working when other things were not? And one of the factors that he identified was in his report to Old Man Rockefeller. He said that the people in recovery found that prayer and meditation was essential to recovery, and that meetings were helpful to recovery. Now, that just kind of floored me because for 20 years I had been brought up on a diet of meetings, meetings, meetings. And yes, prayer and meditation is helpful, but we're not so sure on how to do that. But here's a few pointers, and good luck with it. So the emphasis was in a very different direction. So I started studying it, and it changed my life. And hopefully it'll be a part of changing your life as well. So that one really stood out for me. And the second one was that the statistics seem to bear up that in early AA, in the late 30s, early 40s, they were experiencing more recovery. People were staying abstinent in larger numbers than we are seeing today. And why was that? And again, the emphasis seems to have been on the prayer and the meditation factor that had really kind of gotten lost over the years. And the third one was a very important statement from Bill Wilson himself, where he said that something was lost from AA when we stopped focusing on the morning prayer and meditation. So that got me going with it. Been doing it for 28 years. Been teaching it for, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20, something like that. And let's just kind of give you the highlights of it. We kind of went into it in depth in some of the different episodes, but here I just want to touch on the highlights and then maybe give you a sample of my own writings on this and how I approach it. So first thing is when do you do it? And the emphasis was very clearly on a morning practice. Uh, and they weren't hard and fast about this is how you have to do it, and it must be done in this manner. And here's an exact guide for doing it. It was a bit hazy. It's like each soul is a little bit different, and your soul is going to light up with certain things and respond very clearly and deeply to those, but not to others. And I think that's what they were sort of looking for. You need to develop your own practice. But they were clear that morning is by far the best time to do it. How long should it be? The recommendation was at least a half hour, maybe an hour or so. But even more important than that, than the length of time, was the consistency of the process. That it's not going to do you much good to do a 2 hour session once a week. Much better to do 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes every day, to show up, to sit, and to do the practice. And that's what I have done. It's been pretty consistent over the years. What's involved? Well, one thing, and we did a session on this, an episode on this, but was reading. So I mean, it's not just a half hour of sitting there in celestial bliss. Part of the process, and for me, a pretty healthy part of the process, is reading. Reading what? Well, the early AAs were by and large Christians, not all, but many were, and so the focus was on the Bible. But they also said or guided books, and I was really happy to find that little clause in there. Books that help you spiritually. And that's been a tremendously important part of my two-way prayer and morning quiet time process, is reading, finding authors who really speak to me. And for some reason, when I first got interested in the early Oxford group material, they weren't called the Oxford group. I discovered they had been called a first century Christian fellowship. And those words just jumped out at me for some reason. And what I did, and I don't know that everybody has to do this, but this was my process. I began reading as much material as I could find on first century Christianity. What was going on there? And there were a number of authors who were really helpful to me. Two of them I'll mention, and I will put them in the program notes. But one was Marcus Borg. Um, and the other was John Dominic Crossan, and they presented, and because I was struggling with Christianity, I was had been raised in the church, but had kind of come to a point where I said, well, I don't get this, and I don't know that I believe this, and uh, doctrines and dogmas were kind of getting in my way. Uh, and they presented first century Christianity in a way that opened a door for me. And in my case, we each have our higher power, our own concept of God as we understand God, as God reveals Himself or herself to us. And and for me, it opened the door to seeing Jesus in that capacity, that He was the image of God for me, that I could then begin to work with. So reading is extremely important. Bill Wilson said AA is a spiritual kindergarten, and the early people, the pioneers, were doing reading. Dr. Bob had a very extensive library in his house, and I don't know that there's going to be much growth going on if you're not pursuing a course of spiritual development and reading as part of your morning quiet time. After reading, what do you do? Well, this is where the meditation and the prayer, I think, come in. And I As I said earlier, I struggled with meditation and prayer. I kind of did my 24-hour book, and in the early days, smoked my cigarette, drank my coffee, asked for a day of sobriety, maybe said the third step prayer, and off I went. But this was different. This was finding literature that really spoke to my heart, to my soul, and then meditating on it. And what meditation means is to think deeply on a subject, to ponder it, to soak in it, to breathe it in, to allow the words to have their effect on you. It's not that you have to read, 20 pages. You read until something really kind of strikes you, and you find the authors that will help you do that. I'll give you a sample of this at this point, and this is from A Testament of Devotion by Thomas Kelly. I'll put that in the notes as well. But this is just the beginning of his chapter, and it's a chapter called "The Light Within," and it really, really moved me. Uh, he says this: deep within us all, there is an amazing inner sanctuary of the soul, a holy place, a divine center, a speaking voice to which we may continuously return. Eternity is at our hearts, pressing upon our time-torn lives, warming us with intimations of an astounding destiny, calling us home unto itself, capital I. Yielding to these persuasions, gladly committing ourselves in body and soul, utterly and completely to the light within, is the beginning of true life. It is a dynamic center, a creative life that presses to birth within us. It is the light within which illumines the face of God, and He is within us all. It's like what the big book says, hey? The great reality is within, and conscious contact is attempting to connect with this inner light, this inner voice, this inner presence, and to discover who I am, because who I am ain't who I think I am when I begin going down this process. So I'll share with you a writing that I did following that. So I meditated on that for several minutes, and just allowed it to sink into my mind, the depths of my mind. And here's what I wrote: Holy light, help me see you at the center of my darkness. Come and lead me out. Light speaking, my brother, I am here, burning within. Come and sit, breathe, relax. Let me lead. But do not cling to my light. You are the light as well. You must find and further your own. I don't want clones. I want men and women in touch with truth and committed to it. This light must burn away all that is not it, like the sun burns away the morning mist. Sit in our light, feel it burn, reach for it, and when you find it, carry it out into your world. Now visualize a tiny flame in your heart. See it as who you are. Protect it from the winds and the rain. Guard it with the four absolutes. They are not a burden. They are your beacon. So there was my experience of a two-way prayer session where I'm taking to God my need, and I'm opening myself up to His presence, and then creatively, unconsciously, I would say, allowing the thoughts to come, and kind of roll over me like a wave. It's not the only way I do two-way prayer. I'm a child of the 12 steps, and I am really accustomed to steps 10, 11, and 12 as being extremely important to us in recovery. And so the way I begin it is to watch myself. Step 10, I watch. When I may do the reading, but then I will watch. Watch what? Watch myself inside and watch myself outside. Am I connected? Am I feeling connected to God? Am I feeling conflict going on in my life? That's on the outside. Is there conflict? Is there anger? Is there resentment? Is there fear? What's happening? And to look at that and to own it, and then to ask for help with that, and then to allow the voice to speak to that, to comfort me in that, to guide me often in that. Uh, the voice generally takes me much deeper, and in the voice, in the presence, I generally feel a sense of connectedness, a sense of wholeness that I had not been feeling before. Um, so 10 to watch, 11 is to pray. And I'm often quoted Tom Powers in this. Uh, he was a student, a sponsee of Bill Wilson's, and helped him write the 12 and 12. And Tom said, if you don't watch, you don't know what the hell to pray for. So that I've incorporated watchfulness into my morning quiet time practice, seeing where I'm out of whack. To use Star Wars language, is there a disturbance in the force? Where is it? Identify it, and then take it to God. Ask God for help and guidance, and then I receive it and write it down. And that was one of the things that they strongly encourage, that you must have the pen and the paper in hand. And I approach this a little bit differently. I just say, if God were to speak, what would He say? And I allow my imagination to take over, and to enter into a session of listening to God. I was going to say a dialogue, but I only ask one question. I let God do the speaking. I don't interrupt and go back and forth, but just let it come. And when it's done, stop. At the end of that process, you're at step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening, originally an experience, an encounter with God, having had this, now I try to practice these principles in all of my affairs. And by and large, the principles, at least one set of the principles that they were referring to, were certainly the four absolutes: the honesty, the purity, the unselfishness, and the love. Bill Wilson said he put these into steps 6 and 7. That was a major awakening for me, a real shift in my understanding of what's involved there. And then some writings that I found from Dr. Bob, how he practiced them throughout his life and found them tremendously helpful. Not so much when in discerning what's right from what's wrong. He said that's where you have a conscience. But if you have two things that are right, which way do you go? And so as I've kind of gone into this, what I've found is that it's a shift. It's a inner shift away from my ego voice, which is always worrying and ranting and raving and judging and all of that stuff that most of us know quite well, to hearing another voice And that is the voice of true self, the God within, the part of me that is already in touch with God. Different ways of using language that express who this voice is, because it isn't my normal ego self. That's what I'm real clear about. But it is a self. Jung would spell it with a capital S, that is within me and is trying to have me become fully me, to become the self I was intended to be, I could be, and then to reach for that. So 12 becomes acting on it. You've had guidance, you've had an encounter with God, you feel that closeness. Now carry it out into the world. We're not going to sit there and meditate on our navels. Uh, we are people of action, and this is a program of action. And so the emphasis now becomes following my guidance and particularly helping other people um, uh, make this connection that we have made within ourselves. A couple of things I want to say, and then I'll close. But uh, this process, I believe, is primarily between God and myself. For 10 years, I did it completely alone. And I know people, since I've been doing these workshops and things, people are starting two-way prayer meetings, and I worry a little bit about that because it's not. We're so used to meetings. I mean, that's part of what has happened to us over the last 85 years of the recovery movement. It's meeting based. Well, this is an individual practice primarily, and now what I found very helpful was after I was doing this and practicing it daily, to then begin sharing it with one other person who I taught the process, and then they began doing it, and he would share with me um, what he was receiving that week, and I would share with him what I was receiving, and that was tremendously helpful to both of us And there's a thing on our website under resources called Prayer Partners. And I'd invite you to go and to download that and study it a little bit. But then finally, is there a place for meetings? And I think, yes, there is. The way I practice it, and I'm going to do a full podcast on this coming up not too distant future, is that you get a group of people who are each doing their two-way prayer on a daily basis, and they meet weekly, and then they read one selection from that two-way prayer, and then we go around the group, and people comment not on what they heard God saying to you, but what they heard God saying to them through you. In other words, they don't critique your writing, but your writing begins to speak to them in terms of, I needed to hear that because what God's saying to you, He's also saying to me. And we're definitely going to do a couple of podcasts on that. And my hope is to add a sample group to the website. And if you would like a copy of a group formula for doing it via Zoom or in person, you can write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send that to you. So just a couple of personal reflections that I wanted to share with you on this process. Like I say, I've been doing it for 28 years. Totally changed my life. Totally changed my program. Um, uh, I am not bored with the spiritual life anymore. It's an exciting connection that I've found by going back into the history and finding out that this is what they did in the early days. So thank you so much for listening. I hope some of this material was helpful to you. Love to hear from you. Drop me a line, twowayprayer@gmail.com. God bless. Keep coming back.